welcome to the Room of Requirement. Today I'm going to be covering a subscriber request video, and they asked how real is magic really, and some other questions too. So I hope you guys enjoy this one, and let's go ahead and dive right in. There comes a point on the spiritual path where the questions begin to change. In the beginning, most people ask what to practice, what ritual to do, what meditation to use, what book to read, and what symbol means what. But eventually, if the practice is real, if it truly begins affecting the structure of your consciousness, another question emerges from somewhere much deeper. What is actually happening to me? What do I perceive? Why do I perceive people differently now? Why do certain places feel heavy? Why does my intuition sharpen? And why does my nervous system react before my mind understands why? Why does the world begin feeling layered, symbolic, and alive? And perhaps the most dangerous question of all, how real is magic actually? Not fantasy, not role play, not aesthetic spirituality, not social media mysticism, but real, lived experiential transformation. Because eventually, every serious practitioner reaches a threshold where psychology, spirituality, symbolism, consciousness, nervous system regulation, energetic perception, and occult philosophy all begin colliding into one another. And most people are completely unprepared for what happens when these worlds start merging together. The deeper traditions understood something modern culture has largely forgotten. Human beings are not merely physical creatures moving through dead matter. We are psychological beings, symbolic beings, energetic beings, and spiritual beings. And consciousness itself may interact with reality in ways we do not fully understand. So today, I want to explore these ideas deeply, because one of the comments left on my recent video perfectly captured a question many practitioners eventually arrive at after years on the path. And honestly, it is one of the best comments I've received in a long time. So here's the subscriber's comment. They were responding to a video that I had done a few weeks back. They said, it feels like it's actually taken me longer than 6 months to get the skyrocketing phase, because I was talking about milestones on the path. And then they go on to say, but I think I was initially using my practice to run away from my problems. Things started to progress when I decided to confront them. I'm dealing with a lot of repressed fear that's coming to the surface right now, and it's as liberating as it is painful. And this is very textbook. This happens to us when we're on the path long enough. They go on to say another idea for a video that I'd like to suggest, if you'll allow it to me, is how real is magic? For example, when a person that intimidates me walks into a room, I feel a certain way. Now, a materialist would say that I'm just responding to biochemical signals. A magician might say that I felt their aura. Now, does the aura exist in the way anger exists, or in the way justice does, or the internet? For most people, that's not enough. They want magic, energy to be closer to the material. There are also different views regarding the powers or the cities. Some say that they can only affect the astral realm. Others suggest that the standards by which we judge a master are too low these days, so what is considered a master today isn't as advanced as a master of the past, and that's why their powers aren't as potent. It's similar to the debate between soft, hard jhanas and Buddhism. I'm curious what you think. Anyway, thanks for the video. Okay, so I'm going to answer every single one of these questions, so you guys kind of just buckle up, because we're going to get into it pretty deep. Okay, so this comment touches something incredibly important, because hidden inside these questions are several deeper questions that almost every serious practitioner eventually confronts. What is spiritual practice actually doing to the human being? What is the difference between psychology and energy? Where does occultism intersect with consciousness itself? Are subtle forces symbolic, literal, or both? And perhaps most importantly, at what point does spirituality stop being belief and become direct experience? This is where the conversation begins becoming dangerous to modern materialism, because eventually every serious practitioner encounters experiences that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence alone. Not fantasy, not delusion, not aesthetic spirituality, direct experience. And that's what we're all searching for. And this is important because I want to approach this subject in a grounded way, not from blind belief, but from observation, experience, historical, occult, and esoteric philosophy, and even modern research into consciousness itself. One of the researchers that I think deserves serious attention in this conversation is Dean Radin, particularly through works like his books Real Magick and Entangled Minds. Radin spent decades researching consciousness, intention, psychic phenomena, telepathy, presentiment, and measurable effects of focused awareness on physical systems. Whether someone fully agrees with his conclusions or not, the important point is this. There are legitimate researchers who have spent their lives attempting to study consciousness and subtle influence through empirical observation rather than superstition. And this matters because one of the biggest misconceptions people have about magic is assuming occult traditions were speaking purely metaphorically. They were not. The deeper esoteric traditions believe consciousness itself interacts with reality, not only psychologically, but energetically. Not necessarily in the exaggerated Hollywood sense people imagine, but through influence, resonance, field interaction, symbolic alignment, probability shifts, intuition, nervous system entrainment, emotional contagion, and subtle exchange of consciousness between human beings and environments. And honestly, I think most people already experience this constantly without even realizing it. You walk into a room after an argument and immediately feel tension. Someone enters a room and the atmosphere changes instantly. Certain people feel calming. Others feel chaotic. Some feel draining. Some feel sharp, intense, or overwhelming. Occult traditions would say the human being projects far more than words, and the stronger the consciousness, nervous system coherence, focus, emotional intensity, discipline, and energetic development become, the stronger that projection becomes as well. Now, this is where I want to speak personally for a moment, because over the years, many people have told me that I have an intimidating presence. And I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying this from ego, superiority, or inflation. In fact, I resisted talking about this publicly for a long time because I understand how easily these conversations can become distorted or taken out of context. But after years of spiritual practice, ritual work, nervous system regulation, energetic discipline, ceremonial magic, and psychic development, I have absolutely noticed changes in the way people respond to my presence. And I do not believe this is simply personality alone. I believe intense spiritual and energetic work changes the field around a person, especially in traditions involving high magic, concentration, ritual purification, shadow integration, meditation, breath work, and nervous system coherence. Because eventually the practitioner themselves become the ritual vessel. So the body changes, the mind changes, the nervous system changes, your perception changes, attention changes, and the field surrounding consciousness changes as well. And one thing I've personally observed is that stronger energetic coherence often acts like a mirror. So I have people react to me in one of three ways. I either intimidate them, they feel really calm and stable around me, or they get obsessed and get super magnetized to me. And this has happened to me my entire life, and especially even more intensely after I started doing all of this work that I just mentioned here. Okay, so what happens is you start to become a mirror reflecting to everyone else, and your energetic system, your aura, whatever you want to call it, it starts to show people things about themselves. Okay, so that's what's happening there. Okay, so people unconsciously begin confronting aspects of themselves in your presence. So their insecurities, their shadow material, their weak points, their emotional fragmentation, their suppressed fear, not because you're attacking them, but because coherence naturally reveals incoherence. So this is actually something many occult traditions hinted at indirectly in Hermeticism, ceremonial magic, certain yogic systems, and initiatory paths. It is understood that intensive spiritual development alters not only the practitioner internally, but also their effect upon environments and other people. And this can be misunderstood very easily. And there's even been points where when I started teaching and mentoring students, I learned over time to like sync with their energetic field or energetic template, as I call it. And then I could mirror to them what they need me to be in that moment and hold space for them if they were having a very intense emotional recall or they needed some type of stability because their nervous system was really dysregulated. And so there's things that I do. I shift my tone, I shift my body language, and I also shift my breathing, my eye contact, and my energetic field follow suit. And so that I'm able to help them in that way and be what they need in that moment, whatever it is. So there's also that happens as well. You learn to entrain your field to other people's fields, and you can connect with them that way. So you're not only exchanging words, you're exchanging energy. So people sometimes interpret strong energetic presence as intimidation, authority, danger, attraction, pressure, mystery, magnetism, or even judgment, when in reality, what they may actually be experiencing is heightened awareness of themselves reflected back through your field. So especially if you have done significant shadow work yourself, which I have done. So because people who confront themselves deeply often become mirrors for others unconsciously. And yes, psychic abilities absolutely factor into this conversation. And I have experienced psychic phenomena throughout my entire life, even as a young child, long before I had language for it, and long before ceremonial magic, and long before formal spiritual practice. But what I noticed over time was that disciplined practice amplified my perception dramatically. And it absolutely had an effect on my psychic abilities, if you want to call them that. So particularly once nervous system regulation entered the equation, and this is something I think modern spirituality severely underestimates. Dysregulated nervous system creates distortion. Fear distorts this perception, trauma distorts perception, anxiety distorts intuition, projection distorts discernment. So, but the more regulated, grounded, coherent, and internally stable the practitioner becomes, the clearer, subtle perception often becomes as well. Okay, so this is the reason why. This is one reason serious occult systems emphasize purification. So I do that constantly. Discipline, I have that constantly. I meditate every day, breath work every day, concentration, controlling my emotions, dealing with my emotions, not suppressing them or running from them, and psychological integration of all of this before the deeper energetic work takes place. So I'm doing all of this. Because the goal was never fantasy, the goal was refinement over consciousness itself. And from an occult perspective, consciousness is not passive. It influences, it radiates, it interacts, and it affects environments, and it affects people. And eventually, after enough practice, the practitioner begins realizing something ancient traditions understood long ago, that the human being is not separate from the field of reality around them. We are one with everything. We have this illusion that we are separate from the divine and separate from each other, but we're actually totally encoded in everyone else's energetic field constantly, those we come in contact with, those far away. This is just basic, like quantum physics, if you will, right? We're not separate. So there's another layer to this conversation that I think is extremely important, especially when discussing energetic presence, coherence, and why certain people profoundly affect the atmosphere around them without speaking a single word. So one modern thinker whose work I find very interesting in this area is Robert Edward Grant. Grant is a polymath, inventor, accomplished author, researcher, and public scholar whose work spans sacred geometry, consciousness studies, mathematics, number systems, frequency, symmetry, quantum theory, and energetic coherence. Many people know him through the Gaia channel, but he's also on social media. You can find him on Instagram. He also does a lot of work with Matthias Stefano as well. So I like those guys. I always watch what they do. But what makes his work particularly fascinating is his attempt to bridge ancient metaphysical principles with modern mathematical and scientific frameworks. So he's also worked extensively with advanced AI systems, including his architect framework, which he invented while exploring how geometry, consciousness, harmonic structures, and coherence may interact with reality itself. Now, whether someone agrees with every conclusion he reaches is not even the main point here. So this is his work is the reason why I have a different type of view on AI and what it's going to do for spirituality. Okay, the important point is that there are highly intelligent people seriously exploring the possibility that consciousness, geometry, energetic resonance, and coherence may be interconnected phenomenon rather than isolated concepts. And honestly, this idea is not foreign to ancient esoteric traditions at all. Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Pythagorean mystery schools, sacred geometry traditions, Platonic philosophy, tantric systems, alchemy. All of these systems understood reality as fundamentally ordered through pattern, vibration, proportion, harmony, and consciousness. The ancients believed geometry was not merely mathematical, it was ontological, a language underlying manifestation itself. And this is where the concept of field coherence becomes incredibly interesting. When a person undergoes intense spiritual discipline, ritual work, nervous system regulation, meditation, breath work, shadow integration, energetic refinement, focused attention, symbolic contemplation, the internal alignment, their internal fragmentation gradually decreases. The mind becomes quieter. The emotions become more ordered. The nervous system stabilizes. Attention sharpens. The internal world becomes less chaotic. From an energetic perspective, this creates coherence. And coherent systems naturally influence incoherent systems. This is true in physics, and it is true in biology. It is true in nervous system entrainment, and occult traditions would argue it is also true spiritually and energetically. All of those series material content I put out, it's about this right here. So if you guys kind of went over your head a little bit, or you didn't fully understand it, this right here, that's what all those series was. The altar series, the temple series, all of that. I was talking about what happens when this happens, all of these things that I just talked about. So if you guys are new and you haven't seen that stuff yet, or you've seen it and you didn't understand it, that's go check out the series material that I did, because this is exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so when someone with a highly coherent field enters a room, other people may unconsciously begin feeling their own fragmentation more intensely, their anxiety, their insecurity, their emotional disturbances, their shadow material, their internal contradictions. Not because the coherent person is better than them, but because coherence naturally reveals distortion. Just as still water reflects clearly, while turbulent water distorts the reflection that it gives back. And I think this explains why some people experience spiritually developed individuals as intimidating, intense, magnetic, calming, overwhelming, or deeply penetrating psychologically, even when no aggression is present whatsoever. The field itself communicates something, and this idea aligns surprisingly well with certain interpretations of quantum coherence. When systems enter greater states of order, synchronization, resonance, and harmonic stability, they begin affecting surrounding systems. Occult traditions describe this symbolically, modern researchers may describe it mathematically, and psychology may describe it behaviorally. But all three may ultimately be pointing toward the same underlying phenomena viewed through different lenses. And this is why I believe advanced spiritual practice eventually becomes far more than belief. it becomes embodied coherence, and the practitioner themselves becomes the temple, and the nervous system becomes the instrument, and the field becomes a transmission. And whether people consciously understand it or not, they feel it. This is one of the most intelligent parts of this entire comment, because it exposes a limitation in the way modern culture defines the word real. Most people unconsciously believe that if something is real, it must be physically solid, externally measurable, immediately observable, and materially demonstratable. But that standard immediately collapses under scrutiny, because some of the most powerful forces governing human existence are not material objects at all. Justice is not a physical object. Meaning is not a physical object. Love is not a physical object. Fear, culture. The internet itself is largely invisible infrastructure, transmitting invisible information through invisible fields. So yet all of these things alter human behavior and shape reality in very profound ways. So the real question is not, is the aura physically solid like a chair? The real question is, does it produce observable effects? Because this is how we identify the existence of many invisible phenomena. Gravity itself cannot be seen directly, magnetic fields cannot be seen directly, and radio waves cannot be seen directly, but we infer their existence through interaction and effort and effect. And I think this is where the conversation about aura and energy becomes more nuanced than most people realize. When occult traditions speak about the aura, they are often attempting to describe a layered field of consciousness, emotion, nervous system signaling, subtle energetic projection, symbolic resonance, and psychic influence surrounding the human being. Now, could part of this involve biochemical signaling? Absolutely, right? Hormones, micro expressions, body language, we all have these, right? We all do this. Electromagnetic activity from the heart and brain, subconscious pattern recognition, trauma responses, and nervous system entrainment. But again, I don't think this necessarily disproves the esoteric model. In many ways, it may actually support it, because what if the nervous system itself is one of the mechanisms through which subtle energetic information is perceived? What if the body is not separate from consciousness, but an instrument through which consciousness interacts with reality? Occult traditions never separated mind, body, spirit, emotion, and energy as rigidly as modern reductionism does. The Hermetic tradition understood that human beings as layered. Alchemy understood consciousness itself as transformable. Kabbalah described multiple levels of soul and reality. Tantric systems mapped energetic pathways through the body. Eastern systems describe prana and ki moving through the subtle channels. Different systems, different symbols, but remarkably similar observations. And honestly, I think the reason it's not enough for many people is because modern culture has conditioned people to believe reality only exists at the level of dense physical matter. But consciousness itself already breaks that model. Thought alters biology. Belief alters perception. Trauma alters the nervous system. Fear changes hormonal chemistry. Meditation changes brain structure. And emotion changes immune response. So invisible processes creating measurable physical effects. So perhaps the aura is not imaginary versus material. Perhaps it exists in the same category as many other invisible organizing forces that shape human experience. Not fully physical, not merely fantasy, but an emergent field, phenomena arising from consciousness, biology, emotion, attention, symbolism, nervous system regulation, and energetic interaction simultaneously. And honestly, the deeper one goes into serious spiritual practice, the harder it becomes to maintain the illusion that human beings are isolated mechanical objects separated from one another. You begin realizing people constantly affect one another below the threshold of language through presence, emotion, attention, projection, resonance, coherence, psychological fields, and perhaps something even deeper that older traditions tried to describe through language of spirit and energy. The occult traditions did not arrive at these ideas randomly. They observed them for thousands of years. One of the reasons people struggle with spirituality and magic is because modern culture has conditioned us to only trust what can be physically demonstrated in obvious and immediate ways. People want levitation, telekinesis, visible spiritual displays, instant manifestations, and physical impossibilities. And because most people do not witness these things openly, they assume either that magic is completely fake or ancient traditions were entirely symbolic. But I think the truth is much more nuanced than either extreme. First, we need to understand what siddhis actually are. In yogic traditions, siddhis were understood as extraordinary capacities or attainments that can arise through deep spiritual practice, meditation, concentration, energetic development, purification, and altered states of consciousness. Different traditions described different abilities: heightened intuition, telepathic perception, prophetic dreams, energetic influences, out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, perception beyond ordinary sensory limitations, influence over consciousness and emotional states, deep states of mental stillness and perception. And importantly, many traditions warn practitioners not to become obsessed with powers. But siddhis were often viewed as side effects of transformation, not the ultimate goal. Now, this is where the astral conversation becomes incredibly important. In my own study, teachings, practice, and direct experience, I personally believe that nearly all energetic and magical phenomena first occur within the subtler layers of reality before descending into denser manifestations, meaning that the astral precedes the physical. This is actually an ancient occult idea. Hermeticism hinted at it, Neoplatonism hinted at it, Kabbalah, ceremonial magic systems, dream traditions, they all hinted at it. The subtle informs the dense. The invisible organizes the visible. Consciousness impresses itself downward through layers of manifestation. And this is why I believe so much spiritual and magical work appears difficult to prove materially in the way modern people demand, because the work often begins beyond the densest layer of physical perception. And I will tell you, I've had about 40 plus out-of-body experiences. I've been coming out of my body since I was a small child. Just now got a handle on it where I can control it when it happens. Over there is way more real than this. Everything feels more solid. The light spectrum completely changed. Way more colors, brightness, all of that stuff. It feels way more solid there than it does in this realm. Also, we do have what we call time-space potentialities that we can see in out-of-body states, and those things will tend to not always manifest in the physical realm, but they will in the astral realm only. Okay. So in my experience, magic, energetic movement, dreaming, psychic communication, ritual work, consciousness, interaction, out-of-body states, and deep intuitive perception all seem to operate through the astral layers first before eventually filtering downward into physical experience. Sometimes this manifests externally, sometimes psychologically, sometimes symbolically, sometimes emotionally, and sometimes through synchronicity, and sometimes through altered probabilities, and dreams, and direct energetic perception. And yes, I also believe there are experiences and phenomena that occur almost entirely within astral or subtle dimensions that may never fully condense into dramatic physical manifestation. And I just explained why. But that does not make them unreal. Dreams themselves occur internally, yet they profoundly affect human beings. Trauma occurs invisibly within consciousness, yet reshapes biology and behavior. So thought itself is immaterial, yet civilizations emerge from ideas. The astral in many occult systems was never considered imaginary. It was considered intermediary, a bridge between consciousness and matter. A symbolic, energetic realm through which forces, archetypes, thoughts, emotions, intentions, and spiritual intelligences interact before manifesting more densely. And honestly, I think one of the greatest misunderstandings modern people have is assuming reality only consists of physical matter. The ancients did not think this way. They viewed reality as layered, physical, energetic, psychological, symbolic, spiritual, and archetypal, interwoven dimensions of experience influencing one another constantly. And this is why advanced magical traditions focus so heavily on visualization, symbolism, ritual space, trance states, dream work, sigils, invocations, sacred geometry, planetary intelligence, and altered states of consciousness, because they believe consciousness itself interacted with the architecture of reality, not metaphorically, actually. And now I do think every claim, now I do think that every claim throughout occult history is literal. No. I think exaggeration, symbolism, mythologizing, misunderstanding, and projection absolutely do exist. But I also think modern materialism dismisses enormous dimensions of human experience simply because they cannot be fully reduced to laboratory measurements. And I think serious practitioners eventually discover something important. The deeper you go into consciousness work, the more reality begins behaving less like dead machinery and more like an interconnected field of mind, symbol resonance, and living intelligence. So that realization alone changes the practitioner permanently. This is honestly one of the most fascinating questions in all of spirituality and occultism, because it forces us to confront something uncomfortable. Modern culture may not create the same conditions for mastery that ancient civilizations once did, and I think there is truth to that. So now I want to approach this carefully and with nuance, because I do not believe modern practitioners are automatically lesser than practitioners of the past. There are absolutely serious practitioners alive today doing profound inner work, deep ritual work, authentic mystical practice, and genuine transformation. But at the same time, I do think the conditions surrounding consciousness, attention, discipline, and spiritual development have changed dramatically. Ancient initiatory systems were often built around an entirely different relationship to reality itself. Many practitioners live slower lives, more ritualized lives, more symbolically connected lives, more nature-connected lives, more cosmologically integrated lives. Entire civilizations once oriented themselves around the stars, sacred cycles, rites of passage, temple systems, initiatory schools, and metaphysical frameworks that permeated their daily existence. And perhaps most importantly, attention itself was different. Modern people live inside constant fragmentation, notifications, advertising, algorithmic simulation, psychological overload, information addiction, nervous system dysregulation, environmental toxicity, social media identity construction. The modern nervous system is under assault constantly, every day, 24/7. And this absolutely affects consciousness, because concentration itself is a form of power. Stillness is a form of power. Presence is a form of power, and ancient systems understood this deeply. And some initiatory traditions required decades of meditation, purification, ritual development, celibacy, contemplation, silence, memorization, energetic work, and psychological transformation before recognizing someone as spiritually advanced. So today, people can watch short videos for 6 months and begin calling themselves masters. And that doesn't mean modern spirituality is false, but it does mean standards have shifted culturally. And honestly, we can only speculate how advanced some ancient practitioners truly were, because we no longer fully inhabit the worlds that they inhabited. Some may have been myth, Some stories may have been symbolic, some accounts exaggerated, but I also think modern materialism dismisses ancient consciousness traditions far too easily, especially when nearly every civilization independently arrived at remarkably similar conclusions regarding consciousness, energy, subtle perception, symbolism, initiation, and transformation. And I think lifestyles itself played a massive role in that. If someone spends 40 or 50 years inside deep contemplative practice, ritual systems, energetic refinement, dietary discipline, nervous system regulation, and focused consciousness training within a civilization built around spiritual cosmology, what might become possible? We honestly don't know. And I think modern people underestimate how much consciousness can develop through sustained refinement over an entire lifetime, especially when the practitioner is not fragmented by modern world every 5 seconds. So now regarding the Buddhist debate around soft and hard jhanas, I think that discussion reflects something broader happening across spirituality as a whole. The tension between direct attainment and diluted interpretation, between authentic depth and symbolic approximation, and between true transformation and conceptual understanding. And I think that tension exists in every spiritual tradition now. Cultism, mysticism, yoga, meditation, ceremonial magic, alchemy. The modern world often prioritizes information over transformation. And that's a big problem, right? But the older traditions prioritized embodiment. That's also huge, right? We need more of that. And that is a massive difference. And at the same time, I do not think that we should romanticize the past too heavily either, because every era has distortion, every era has frauds, every era has genuine adepts, and every era has exaggeration. I do think and believe that there is wisdom in recognizing that many ancient systems approached mastery with an intensity, seriousness, discipline, and lifelong devotion that is relatively rare today. And perhaps that is why the deeper traditions always emphasized humility, because the further someone truly advances, the less likely they are to reduce spirituality to performance, identity, and spectacle. Real mastery often becomes quieter. I've talked about this before too. This is what I was talking about. More grounded, more coherent, more stable, more refined, not necessarily more theatrical. And honestly, I think one of the greatest mistakes modern spirituality makes is assuming advancement is unmeasured primarily by visible powers, but some of the most advanced people may appear outwardly ordinary while possessing extraordinary depth internally. And the ancient traditions often, I lost my line. The ancient traditions often, I can't read that, hinted at this repeatedly. Sorry guys, I'm getting older, my eyes are going. The true initiate is transformed first in consciousness, and everything else emerges from there. The comparison to soft and hard jhanas in Buddhism is actually a very intelligent analogy because it reflects a larger issue happening across almost all spiritual systems. For those unfamiliar, jhanas in Buddhism are deep states of meditative absorption and altered consciousness developed through sustained concentration and practice. But there is an ongoing debate regarding what qualifies as true jhana state. Some traditions describe soft jhanas as lighter absorptive states, real, beneficial, transformative, but still maintaining some awareness of ordinary thought and sensory experience. Other traditions argue for hard jhanas, which involve extremely profound states of absorption, where ordinary sensory awareness and mental chatter can become almost completely suspended. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And this debate mirrors something happening across spirituality as a whole. How do we define authentic attainment? At what point does a state become genuine realization rather than partial approximation? And I think this is where modern spirituality becomes complicated. because many people today are experiencing legitimate transformation, healing, awakening, energetic perception, and altered consciousness. I don't dismiss that at all. But at the same time, older traditions often describe levels of concentration, discipline, and consciousness development that were extraordinarily intense by modern standards. Hours of meditation daily, decades of practice, extreme nervous system training, monastic discipline, isolation, purification systems, and total lifestyle devotion. So when modern practitioners compare themselves to ancient adepts, yogis, magicians, monks, initiates, or mystics, we have to acknowledge that the conditions surrounding practice were profoundly different. Not better in every way, but different. And I think this is why the conversation around cities and mastery becomes so difficult to navigate honestly, because modern culture tends to collapse all spiritual development into one category. But historically, traditions recognized many stages of attainment. Awakening was not mastery. Perception was not realization. Psychic sensitivity was not enlightenment. Energetic awareness was not full liberation. There were layers, there were depths, degrees of refinement, and I personally think both sides of the debate contain truth. I think modern practitioners can absolutely access real states of transformation and authentic spiritual development. But I also think it is possible that some ancient practitioners achieved levels of concentration, coherence, and consciousness stabilization that are extremely rare today due to lifestyle, culture, environmental conditions, and total devotion on the path. And honestly, humility is probably the healthiest response to all of this, because the deeper someone goes into authentic practice, the more they realize how vast consciousness actually is. And also, I want to add to this, I think that we do, if you believe in reincarnation, which I wholeheartedly do, I think we do carry the memories and the attainments. We carry those in our energetic field in memory as we incarnate. So I think some people who were even alive back then in the ancient times, I think they bring that with them naturally into incarnations. And I think they retain the memory of that. And so I think that's why, another reason why it is very possible for someone to attain that now, or maybe become a master now, because they've put in the work in previous incarnations. That's my personal opinion. At the end of all of this, I think the most important realization is that spirituality stops being philosophy once it becomes lived experience. Eventually, the practitioner reaches a threshold where something undeniable begins happening internally. Perception changes, sensitivity changes, awareness changes, dreams change, presence, relationships, the nervous system, the way reality itself is experienced begins changing. And this is why I think the question, is magic real, can never be answered fully through argument alone. Because ultimately, occultism was never meant to be approached purely intellectually. It was experiential, initiatory, transformational. The ancient traditions did not simply ask people to believe, they asked them to practice, to refine themselves, to confront themselves, to regulate themselves, to discipline attention, to purify perception, to stabilize consciousness, to enter altered states directly, to observe reality carefully. And through that process, many practitioners across thousands of years arrived at remarkably similar conclusions: that consciousness is not passive, that the human being is more than biological machinery, that reality appears layered, and that symbolism, emotion, thought, energy, psyche, spirit, and matter are far more interconnected than modern reductionism is comfortable admitting. Does that mean every occult claim throughout history is literally true? No. Discernment matters, psychology matters, projection matters, delusions exist, fantasy exists, ego inflation exists, and serious practitioners may remain grounded enough to navigate those dangers honestly. But I also think that modern materialism has created its own form of blindness. because in trying to reduce reality purely to chemistry and mechanism, it often strips reality of depth, meaning, symbolism, mystery, and consciousness itself. And the deeper one goes into authentic practice, the harder it becomes to maintain the illusion that human beings are isolated fragments moving through a dead universe. You begin sensing something else, an interconnected field, a living architecture, a symbolic intelligence moving beneath appearances. And perhaps this is why the deeper traditions always taught that the greatest power was never domination over the external world. It was mastery of the self. Because eventually, the real magic is not simply moving energy. It is transforming consciousness. It is becoming coherent where you were fragmented, perhaps where you were unconscious, whole where you were divided, and aware where you were asleep. And perhaps that is the true initiation hidden beneath all genuine spiritual paths. The realization that the deeper mystery was never separate from you. You were always standing inside of it. So is magic real? To me, yes. Very real. Undeniably real. And my experience makes it real, and I got there one step at a time. Okay, you guys, this is all I have for you. I hope you really enjoyed this one. Shout out to my superstar subscriber who has given me so many awesome ideas where I get to share what I think. So, okay, so I have some content coming up on the precession of the equinoxes, the history of esoteric astrology, the eras, the ages, and then I'm also going to be talking about separation, and I'm losing my other one that I was separation. I can't remember right now. Along those lines, it's going to really tie into what I've been doing anyway. Sorry, my mind's going, it's getting late. So anyways, look forward to more content. I will see you guys later. I really appreciate all of you. You guys make this so fun for me, and I'm really enjoying life. So thank you. See you guys later. Bye.